with him began in a quite different way. Your interaction with him.
Right. I'd been fascinated by him for years, especially by The Mind of an Eminist, which came out in '68 in English. But then when The Man with a Shattered World came out in '73, I think late '72, I wrote a review of it, which also became an essay on Luria. And this was published in June of '73, which was the same month as my book Awakenings came out. And then the following month, I got one of these wonderful envelopes from Moscow with beautiful stamps, and
he was a great stamp collector.
and Luria's handwriting. I was very excited. It was like getting a letter from Freud.
Yeah.
And he sent me first a very long letter in response to my essay, which really spoke of many aspects in his own life and how separate he felt from both the Pavlov and Skinner, and from mechanical thinking, how important for him it was to see things in terms of social development, so that there was never just an autonomous child, there was always a mother and child, there was always a dialogue. And he spoke of many things, including the way in which Pavlov responded to Luria's own first book, The Nature of Human Conflicts, when Pavlov refused to read it and said, "You call yourself a scientist?" It was a wonderful open letter, and then a week after that I got another letter about Awakenings. And so this was the start of a correspondence which went on till Luria's death in '77. But I never met him. I don't know what inhibited me from going to Moscow, but the correspondence then ramified in different directions. Early on, he hoped one might republish in English some of the classics in Russian, neuropsychology, from Sechenov, and some works by his own father, R.A. Luria. In 1974, when I had my strange leg accident and with a feeling of alienation in the leg, I wrote at length. I found this unintelligible, and I couldn't communicate with anyone except to Luria. And I wrote to him then, and there was a lot of correspondence about this, and he, which especially had to do with the nature of action and body image, and how something could be excluded from body image or alienated if it wasn't active. And I wondered whether I should write about this or not, and he finally got so enthusiastic. He sent me a telegram from Moscow saying, "Do it," and you can quote my letters if you want to. In '75, I started to see a patient with Tourette's syndrome, and I sent Luria some tapes of this, some audio tapes, and he was fascinated and thought there were some similarities between the mental processes of the Tourette and his mnemonist. He partly saw this as mnemonism in action. Duncan Dallas, a filmmaker, hoped to make 3 documentaries, one with Luria, one with Skinner, and one with me. He made the documentaries with Skinner and with myself, but by that time Luria was feeling too ill, I think, to contribute. Occasionally, completely different things would come out in the letters. One of them was his fondness for detective stories. And I sent him a number of those. I think
he was a terrific admirer of American detective stories and English detective stories.
I think the one he liked most was the Sherlock Holmes one, the 7% solution, which imagines Sherlock Holmes as a cocaine addict being analysed by Freud. Luria loved that.
I sent him all the Niall Marsh books, I remember.
Yes, he especially asked, I think, for Nicholas Freeling books from me.
Yes,
Yes,
right.
Right. To what extent, you're one of the few people who write about Luria and his notion of romantic science. And I'm curious about the sort of initiation or the cause-effect or relationship between your ideas on this topic and his. How did that come up in the first time?
The early Luria I read was very different. I think the first Luria I read was probably in the late 50s, was the nature of human conflicts, and in particular, the way in which someone with Parkinsonism who could not take a step by himself could organize movement by using a higher cortical mechanism. And since I had seen this constantly among my own patients, but this was the first consideration I had seen. And then in the mid-60s, Higher Cortical Functions was published, and somehow the stultifying sort of phrenological neurology, which I had been taught, could be replaced by this wonderful notion of functional systems with different components, and that seemed to me very, very exciting. But then an entirely different sort of excitement came in when I saw The Mind of an Eminist. I read the first 30 pages thinking it was a novel. And then I realized it wasn't a novel, but a wonderful case history with all the accuracy of science, but all the sensibility and drama and structure of a novel. And I think I'm sort of a storyteller myself, or rather I have a storytelling impulse, which sometimes seems to compete with the analytical impulse. But certainly seeing The Mind of an Eminist, I think, fortified me in my own feeling that I had to attempt some similar sort of portraits of my own patients, which is what I did in Awakenings. I love Victorian case histories and their richness of detail and their insight and their human character. And I had been feeling that neurology was becoming very desiccated. And in Luria's romantic case histories, I had the feeling that the richness of 19th century naturalism was recovered, along with a sort of functional analysis which was completely new and which could take everything to a higher level. So I was thrilled by this.